In the early months of the year 536, something peculiar began to unfold, not suddenly, but in that slow, creeping way that makes people glance toward the horizon and wonder if they're imagining things. The sun, once golden and strong, turned pale, not hidden by storm clouds, not veiled by ordinary fog, just dim, as if its very fire had waned. Day after day, it rose behind a strange gray-blue haze and cast a weak, lifeless light across the land. Shadows grew soft and strange. The world took on the look of dusk, even at noon, and people noticed. In the countryside, farmers stepped into their fields and stood still, squinting at the dull sky. They tried to go about their planting, but something felt off. The air was colder than it should have been. The wind tasted dry, empty, wrong. The smell of spring, of wet soil and blooming flowers was missing. In the towns and cities of the Eastern Roman Empire, where the rhythms of life were measured by commerce, bells, and market days, people began to whisper. Some said it was an omen, others joked nervously about angry gods or celestial signs. But the jokes didn't last long, because the strangeness stayed. Week after week, the light did not return to normal, the sun was faint, the warmth never arrived. Fires had to be lit at midday, crops barely grew. The birds, confused, changed their calls, and slowly, a creeping unease settled over the land. No one knew why. But in a world that lived by the seasons, when spring didn't come and summer never truly arrived, something ancient stirred in the hearts of people, a quiet, ancestral fear, not of war or plague or invasion, but of the sky itself. Something had gone wrong in the heavens, and deep down, everyone sensed it. Far from the grand halls of Constantinople or the dusty libraries of scholars, nestled in a quiet village of the Byzantine countryside, lived a family who felt the change not as prophecy or puzzle, but as hunger. Their home was modest, a small stone cottage surrounded by fields of barley and beans, now stubborn and slow to sprout. Chickens paced the yard, confused by the chill. A goat, once steady in its milk, grew leaner by the day, and in the center of it all was Anna, a mother of 3, who rose every morning to knead bread that didn't rise and tend soil that wouldn't warm. Her husband, Marcos, had once served in a provincial garrison but now bent his back to the plow with more quiet desperation than pride. He said little, not because he was stern, but because he was tired, and worried in a way he couldn't yet name. Their children, still small, chased each other barefoot across the yard, their laughter occasionally breaking through the dull air, but even they had begun to ask questions. "Mama," the youngest said one morning, tugging at her skirt, "why won't the sun wake up?" Anna paused. She had no answer. The nights had grown colder, and the hearth was never without a fire now. Blankets once stored for winter were brought back out and draped over sleeping children in the middle of what should have been summer. Neighbors whispered of blight, of a sickness in the wheat. Some wondered if it was a judgment for sins they had forgotten to confess. But Anna simply watched the sky, every day, quietly, waiting for the warmth that never came. One evening Marcos stood in the doorway, watching the blue-gray dusk settle in once more. He didn't look at his wife when he spoke. "We may need to leave," he said. "Leave for where?" she asked, though she already knew. "The city," he replied. "Constantinople, a place of marble, of crowds, of food if they were lucky, and of dangers far different than the creeping cold." The morning they left was colder than any midsummer day should have been. Anna rose before the others, kneading what was left of the flour into dense, flat cakes for the road. The goat had to be left behind. The chickens, too. The family took only what they could carry. Blankets, a knife, dried herbs from the hearth wall, a pouch of olives, and the thin patched sandals on their feet. The village watched them go without ceremony. They were not the first to leave, and they wouldn't be the last. Already, paths that once saw little more than the shuffle of carts and mules now carried families eastward, toward the capital, toward hope, or at least, toward noise. The sound of other people, other worries, other distractions. The road stretched wide and dry beneath a milky sky. Trees leaned tiredly over the path. Dust clung to the hem of Anna's robe. The children asked how much farther, how much longer, how much colder it would get, but Anna had no answers. Marcos walked ahead, his eyes scanning every ridge, every bend. The soldier in him hadn't fully gone quiet. He still watched the world with suspicion, not of armies, but of what hunger might do to strangers on the road. They passed other travelers, some alone, some in wagons. One old man pushing a cart of clay jugs covered in cloth, who said he was heading to the city to sell water, though his eyes looked lost already. At night they huddled beneath trees. The fire barely lasted. A fox darted past once in the dark, startling the youngest child awake. Anna held her close and sang softly, a lullaby her own mother used to hum, not to comfort really, but to remind the night that someone still had a voice. By the fourth day, their food was gone. By the fifth, Marcos said nothing at all. And on the sixth, the golden dome of the Hagia Sophia rose dimly in the distance, not shining, but dull, like everything else beneath this new, broken sun. They had reached the edge of the empire's heart, and now, they had to find a way to survive in it. It loomed before them, not like a sanctuary, but like a beast. A city of stone walls and spires, domes and markets, towers and smoke. Even beneath the dim, unnatural light of the ash-thick sky, it pulsed with a strange sort of life, hurried, wheezing, restless. The gates were crowded, not with soldiers, but with people, families like theirs, merchants with empty carts, priests mumbling prayers as they moved through the press of bodies. No one smiled. Everyone looked thinner than they should. Even the guards at the city gate didn't raise their voices, they just waved people through with sunken eyes. Marcos led the family down the broad avenue past shattered columns and crumbling statues. The old Roman bones of the city showed through here and there, but the grandeur had faded. A once gilded forum now housed ragged tents. Stray dogs nosed through garbage. The scent of boiled cabbage, sewage, and wood smoke hung in the air like a second skin. Anna held the children close. They found a place near the southern wall. A half-collapsed stone structure with no door and a roof patched with fabric. They weren't alone. Another family had already claimed a corner. There was no fire, just silence. That first night, Anna wrapped the children in their blankets and sat awake until morning. She listened to the city, voices murmuring nearby, a cough, a baby crying somewhere far off, and under it all, the steady groan of Constantinople, its markets, its temples, its ships in the harbor, straining to hold up the weight of too many people and too little hope. By morning, Marcos had gone to look for work. Anything. Anna walked with the children to a nearby fountain, where they joined a long line of tired faces waiting for clean water. One woman in front of her turned and whispered, "They say the sun's gone out in Persia too. The cold's reaching Alexandria." Another replied, "Maybe the end of days has started." Anna looked at her children. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. She said nothing, because what could she say? The sky was still wrong, and in the greatest city in the world, no one had any answers, only needs. In the days that followed, the family learned what it meant to be small in a city built for empires. Marcos searched for work among the shipyards, the markets, the warehouses along the Golden Horn, but jobs were rare, and those already in them clung tight. A few coins came his way from hauling crates, once from helping rebuild a collapsed wall, but it was never enough, not with food growing scarcer. Anna tried the bakeries. She stood in long lines, clutching the few copper coins they had left, hoping to buy flat, blackened bread that smelled more of ash than grain. The bakers handed out loaves with tired eyes, sometimes breaking one in half to stretch the supply. No one complained. Everyone knew the grain shipments from Egypt had slowed, and what did come was hoarded by merchants who sold it at twice, even thrice the price, knowing that desperation makes for easy trade. Once, Anna saw a fight break out behind her in the line. Two men grabbing at the same loaf, voices raised, fists flying. The baker ignored it. He just kept handing out bread, one piece at a time. Back at the shelter, the children waited with thin hands and hollow cheeks. The youngest no longer asked about the sun, she only asked if there was something to eat. One afternoon, Anna passed by a priest outside the Hagia Sophia. He was reading aloud from the Psalms, voice hoarse, beard thick with dust. No one stopped to listen. He too seemed more like a ghost than a shepherd. "The days grow short," he murmured, not quite preaching, "and the light withdraws. Let us not lose our salt." Anna didn't know what it meant, but she remembered it. That night she tore the last loaf in silence, gave each child a piece, then split the remaining crumb with Marcos. No one spoke. In the quiet, the sound of wind brushing through cracks in the wall filled the room. It wasn't the howl of a storm, just a reminder. The world was still moving, but no one knew where. The wind changed one morning. It came not cold from the north, but dry from the west, and with it, the scent of burning wood. At first it seemed like nothing unusual. In a city so crowded, fires were always crackling somewhere. But this smell was different, thicker, older. By midday, smoke curled along the rooftops of the southern district. People gathered in alleyways, looking to the sky. The dome of the Hagia Sophia was nearly swallowed in haze. Children coughed, dogs howled. Someone shouted that a warehouse had caught fire. Others said it was the grain stores. Panic moved quickly. Marcos came running, sweat on his brow and soot streaking his arms. He had been working near the piers when it started. Someone had knocked over a brazier near a pile of dried hemp rope. Within minutes, the fire had jumped from building to building, fed by tar, wood, and wind. Anna gathered the children. There was no real escape. Not in a city so densely packed. They moved quickly, clutching a sack of what little they owned. Behind them, flames licked the skyline, and black smoke rolled like a wave over the hills of the city. The streets became chaos. People shouting, trampling, carrying baskets of clothes, dragging children, clutching icons. Soldiers tried to redirect the crowds, but there were too many. Fire leaped across alleys and climbed walls with terrifying speed. A merchant shouted that the end had come. A woman dropped to her knees and began to pray aloud. But Anna kept walking. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. They reached the edge of the aqueduct, where the stone arches cut across the city like ribs. Beneath them, hundreds had gathered, some wounded, some silent, everyone watching the sky turn red. That night, the fire still burned. Its glow shimmered against the sea. The next morning, the air was thick with ash, and the sun, already dimmed by months of strange weather, barely broke through the black veil now hanging over the city. The days after the fire passed like shadows, quiet and brittle. Everything smelled of smoke. The city had always carried the scent of sweat, animals, bread, rot, but now all of it was smothered beneath a bitter, dry ash that clung to clothes and hair and skin. Even the fountains, once the pride of Constantinople, flowed dark. The water tasted strange, like soot and iron, as if the earth itself had burned. People still lined up, cups in hand, but no one lingered. They drank quickly, without looking at one another, then left. Anna rinsed the children's faces with cloths dipped in a basin, but it hardly made a difference. Their skin stayed gritty, their hair smelled like char. She found flakes of ash on her blanket each morning, though they slept indoors. The air carried it in like dust, floating, silent, unwelcome. Marcos no longer spoke much. He still went out daily to look for work or trade, anything to bring food or firewood. He returned with less each time, once with a bruised apple, another time with nothing at all. And still, he'd smile for the children and say something light. But Anna could see it, the slow erosion behind his eyes. They moved into a larger, ruined building with other families. It had once been a bathhouse, they were told. The tiles were cracked and the ceilings stained with smoke, but it kept the wind out. They shared space with strangers, a woman with a newborn, a boy who had lost his voice, an old man who sat all day staring at the wall. No one asked questions. At night, Anna lay awake and listened to the wind. It was quieter now, not like before. It didn't rattle the doors or whistle through the beams. It just moved, slow and low, like something exhausted, as if even the air itself had grown tired of carrying so much sorrow. One evening, the youngest child, wrapped tightly in cloth, asked, "Will the sky ever be blue again?" Anna pulled her closer and whispered the only truth she could offer. "I don't know." The markets of Constantinople had once overflowed with sound and color, rows of citrus, stacks of grain, fish still glistening from the sea, spices in bright cloth sacks, sellers calling out in half a dozen tongues. But now, the markets had dimmed like everything else. Anna walked through them carefully, a child on each hand. Not to buy, they had nothing left to trade, but to see, to understand what the city had become. The stalls still stood, though many were empty. A few sellers offered blackened bread, shriveled onions, salted fish that smelled older than it looked. The colors were gone, the noise, too. No one shouted anymore, no one haggled. Even the most desperate sellers whispered their prices now, as if the act of speaking loud might draw some unseen punishment. A small crowd had gathered near a man offering soup from a wide pot. Anna watched as he dipped his ladle into thin brown liquid and poured it into hands cupped with cloth. No bowls, no spoons, just warmth, shared in silence. Near the steps of a closed basilica, a boy played a flute, or tried to. The notes came out faint and uncertain. No one dropped a coin in his bowl. Still, he played, because what else was there to do? Anna passed a store where once she'd bought herbs, fragrant and green and alive. Now the store was shuttered. A single sprig of thyme hung limp above the frame, dried and crumbling. The children grew tired, their steps slowed. Anna lifted the youngest into her arms and moved toward a shaded corner to sit. She watched the people pass, thin, wrapped in old clothes, eyes sunken, but still searching. This was not famine, not yet, but it was close. The quiet kind, the one that seeps in slowly, steals strength day by day, and leaves only endurance in its place. Marcos met them there, breathless, hands empty. "Nothing," he said simply. "Tomorrow, maybe." Anna nodded. There was nothing else to say. Above them, the sky hung low and gray, and below it, the market waited, silent, colorless, and fading. It began with a cough, not loud or violent, just a small sound that echoed in the corners of the bathhouse where Anna's family had found shelter. At first, no one paid it much attention. After all, the air was filled with ash, and everyone's throats were dry, but the cough returned, again, and then someone else began to cough. A low, rasping wheeze that didn't stop, even through the night. The old man who had stared at the wall stopped sitting up. He curled into his blanket and didn't move. The woman with the newborn no longer spoke. Her voice had gone flat, and her eyes stayed fixed on the baby's face. Pale, too quiet, barely feeding. Whispers spread, not wild rumors, just quiet sentences shared near water buckets or over cold scraps of food. "She's burning up. His lips have gone blue. I heard 3 have already died in the quarter by the old barracks. There were no doctors, none that would come to the poorer districts. And even if they did, there were no herbs, no medicines, no spare cloths to soak in vinegar or wine." Anna watched it unfold slowly, like ink spreading in water. Marcos fell ill next. He tried to hide it, sitting straighter when the children were near, smiling, speaking as if nothing had changed. But Anna could see it, the weight in his shoulders, the fever in his cheeks. At night he shivered under 2 blankets, his breath loud in the quiet room. Anna stayed awake, placing a cool cloth across his forehead again and again. The children watched her with wide, frightened eyes. And still, above them all, the city carried on, its streets quieter than ever, its windows shuttered, its churches filled not with music but murmured prayers and coughs echoing in the high stony domes. Outside, the air was strangely still, no wind, no bird calls, just the slow spread of something unseen, creeping through a city already bent low by hunger and fear. At night, Constantinople became a city of flickering lights, not the golden glow of festivals or the steady warmth of taverns. These were small, cautious flames, wax stubs and oil lamps lit behind closed doors, shielded from view. People whispered now, even indoors, not out of secrecy, but fatigue. Even their fear had grown tired. Anna sat beside Marcos, wiping sweat from his forehead, changing the damp cloths, speaking softly, though she wasn't sure if he heard. His breath came in shallow waves, his lips were dry and cracked. She fed him sips of water, but his hands no longer moved to help her. The children slept on the other side of the room, curled against each other like kittens beneath a wool shawl. The eldest stirred now and then, eyes fluttering, but she didn't wake. Outside, the sound of footsteps had grown rare. When Anna stepped out to fetch water that morning, she passed a house marked with a painted symbol, an X in dark red. Someone had died there, maybe several. A few doors down, another X and another. There were no funeral processions, no incense, no hymns, just silence. The priests came now only in small groups, sometimes escorted by guards. They muttered rites quickly and moved on. Even the churches had lost their sense of sanctuary, and yet candles still burned, in windows, on doorsteps, in little corners where people still remembered the names of their dead, or whispered them like fragile prayers. Anna passed a woman kneeling by a fountain, tracing the shape of a cross in the ash settled on the stone. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She wasn't praying for help, it seemed, just remembering how. That evening Marcos opened his eyes for a moment. He looked at Anna and tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. She placed her hand in his, and he closed his eyes again, and she knew he would not wake again. The fire in his body had burned too long. There was nothing left to burn. The morning Marcos died, the city didn't notice. Outside carts still rolled down the broken roads, pulled by oxen whose ribs showed through their hides. People moved past, eyes down, steps slow. The sun, pale as bone, hung behind its grey veil, and smoke, always, somehow, still smoke, drifted from some distant fire. No one had the energy to name. Inside the bathhouse, Anna sat still beside his body. She didn't cry at first. There were no dramatic wails, no falling to her knees, just the stillness of someone who had spent too many weeks preparing for this moment, even if she never spoke of it. The children watched her, unsure. The eldest knew, in that way children sometimes do, even without being told. She pulled the youngest close, quietly. When the others in the room noticed, the woman with the newborn, the silent boy, the man with the walking stick, No one said a word. They simply nodded, eyes low, a small wordless gesture of shared grief. They had all lost someone. That was the truth of life in the city now. Loss was not shocking. It was expected. Anna wrapped Marcus's body in the last wool blanket they had. She knew there would be no burial, not properly, no procession, no priest to speak the rites. The city had no room for the dead. The bodies were being taken to a mass pit outside the walls. She had seen the carts, so she sat with him a while longer. And when the time came, she and two strangers, a limping man and a girl barely old enough to carry one end, helped carry him to the gate. There, they laid him gently beside others, wrapped in linens, in rugs, in whatever cloth remained. She didn't watch the cart leave. She simply turned and walked home. Home, a broken bathhouse filled with strangers and ash. That night, she told the children he had gone where the sun was still warm, and for the first time in days, they slept. After Marcos was gone, time lost its shape. Anna no longer measured days by sunrise or prayer. The light never changed much anyway, always gray, always strange. Instead, life began to unfold in small tasks, fetching water, trading cloth scraps for a piece of stale bread, comforting the children through the long, still hours of afternoon. She did not speak of him often, not because she forgot, but because in a world that seemed to forget everything, blue skies, sweet air, green leaves, memory had become a burden too heavy to lift daily. Still, she kept the scrap of wool she'd cut from his cloak. It had no purpose, just a thread, but it was something. The city, meanwhile, adjusted in the way that cities do, not with healing, but with a kind of slow, exhausted flexibility. People returned to markets, even if there was little to sell. Some tried to repair roofs. Children played in alleyways again, their laughter thinner but no less real. Anna began taking small sewing jobs, patching cloaks, reattaching buttons, mending torn sleeves. She found a merchant's wife near the edge of the forum, who paid her in bread and herbs. It wasn't much, but it gave her hands purpose. Each evening, she would sit with her needle and thread by candlelight, the children asleep beside her, stitching quietly while the wind whispered against the stone. The thread moved through the cloth with a soft, repetitive sound. She pulled like a lullaby in motion. She found comfort in that rhythm. Not peace, exactly, but stillness. One night, as she tied off a seam, she looked out through the cracked window. The stars were faint, but they were there. Not many, just 2 or 3. Tiny lights, fighting their way through the veil of ash. And Anna, wrapped in silence and threadbare linen, allowed herself one small, fragile thought. Maybe the sky remembers, even if we don't. It was a Tuesday, or what passed for one now, when Anna came across the red thread. She had been sorting through a bundle of discarded fabric from the merchantess wife. Odds and ends, scraps of torn tunics, linings stained with smoke. Most were dull, grey wool, beige linen, a frayed strip of blue so faded it looked like the sky had once touched it, then changed its mind. But there, tangled among it all, was a spool no bigger than her thumb, wound with a thread the color of dried pomegranate skin. It wasn't bright, but it was unmistakably red. She hadn't seen red in months, not in nature, not in cloth, not in lips or cheeks or fruit. It startled her like a voice after a long silence. The children noticed it too. They gathered around her as she unwound a few inches, their fingers reaching to touch it as if it might vanish. The youngest whispered, "It looks like fire." The eldest just smiled, barely, and said nothing. Anna didn't know what to do with it at first. It wasn't enough to sell, not enough to mend anything real, but it stayed in her apron pocket, warm and coiled. She'd run her fingers over it as she walked through the city, threading her way between crowds and smoke, between prayers and trade, between memory and necessity. One evening, she stitched a single red line across the hem of her daughter's cloak. Just one line, nothing loud, nothing fancy, but it was there, like a flame that hadn't gone out. And suddenly, it felt like more than color. It felt like defiance. Quiet, thread-sized defiance in a world that had lost so much of itself to ash and hunger. Other women noticed. One asked where she had gotten it. Another asked if she could have her cloak stitched the same way. Just a touch of color, a reminder that things had not always been gray. Anna didn't charge much, just enough to keep them fed another day. And as the thread grew shorter, the requests grew more frequent, read just a little, like memory sewn in secret. As the city slowly adjusted to its new dim rhythm, Anna found herself drawn more and more to the old parts of Constantinople, not the markets or the piers, but the quiet ruins and worn courtyards where statues leaned and stones whispered old things. One afternoon, while searching for kindling near the edge of the aqueduct, she passed beneath a colonnade she hadn't noticed before. Cracked marble pillars stood like weary guardians over a small square, its fountain dry, its benches broken. A mosaic stretched across the far wall, half-faded, once a scene of bright blue sea and golden sails, now mostly grey and chipped. Still, something in it felt alive. She sat, not because she was tired, but because the place seemed to ask her to. The children played in the dust nearby, dragging sticks, pretending they were ships or oxen or swords, as children do even when they've known sorrow, and Anna simply watched the mosaic. She could still make out a face. A woman robed in blue, hands raised, not in triumph, but in offering. A basket of bread in one palm, a jar of water in the other. Her expression was calm, serious, kind. Anna stared at her for a long time. In a world that had lost color and warmth and the promise of harvest, there was something oddly comforting about this silent figure, offering food that no longer existed. Not false hope, just memory, and something about memory felt worth holding on to. She returned the next day, and the day after. Sometimes she brought her mending, other times just herself. She began to recognize others who came, too. A boy feeding sparrows crumbs, a woman lighting a small candle before leaving a dried fig beneath the mosaic. No one spoke. But in that ruined square, surrounded by stone and silence, people remembered that they were still human, even in the smallest ways, even in the dimmest light. In the weeks that followed, Anna began to write again. Not letters to mail, there were no couriers now, and no one left to write to, but letters all the same. On scraps of parchment she bartered from a bookseller, or on cloth, or sometimes scratched faintly into the backs of broken tiles with the tip of a burnt nail. She wrote to her mother, though her mother had been gone for years. She wrote to Marcos, though there was no place to send it. The words came slowly, like water from a dry well. Simple sentences, things she hadn't said aloud. The bread has less ash in it now. Your daughter stitched a patch into my shawl. The red thread is nearly gone, but not yet. I wish you'd seen her laugh yesterday. She tucked the letters in the folds of her bag, or beneath stones by the old mosaic. Once, she placed one in a clay jar and left it floating in the harbor, not expecting it to be found, just letting it go. The act of writing became its own ritual. She did it in the quiet, when the children slept, or while waiting in long lines for soup, or sitting near the old wall by the forum. Her words were not poems, nor prayers. They didn't ask for anything. They simply said, I am here, we are still here. This happened, and that was enough. Other women began doing it, too. She noticed them scribbling on wood shavings, chalking words onto bricks, whispering stories to each other before dusk. Not tales of kings or emperors, but of children's coughs that healed, of neighbors who shared water, of things that mattered only to them. In a time when history seemed to be breaking apart, they wrote the small pieces, so they wouldn't vanish, so they wouldn't be lost in the ash. By late autumn, if it could still be called that, the ash began to fall more gently, not in thick clouds, not in choking gusts, but like a slow, silent drizzle. It coated rooftops and market stalls, drifted into pots and pans, settled along windowsills and into folds of clothing. It wasn't heavy anymore, just ever-present, as if the sky had decided this was how things were now. The children drew shapes in it, crooked spirals, birds, faces. They laughed sometimes, but not like before. Their laughter was softer, brief. A candle's flicker in a long room. Anna kept her sewing near the fire, now burning more steadily thanks to a neighbor, who found a supply of driftwood washed up near the seawalls. The red thread was nearly gone, just a few inches left, wrapped carefully in a pouch she hid in her cloak. Food came in fits, a fish here, a cup of lentils there. The bread was dry and hard, but not blackened anymore. That felt like progress. People still died, but more slowly now, not in the rush of fever and fire and fear, but in the old ways. A tired heart, a wound that didn't close, an empty stomach stretched too far. The city wasn't recovering. Exactly, it was, enduring. Anna heard whispers that far-off lands had begun to see the sun again, that in Italy the sky had cleared, that in Persia the crops were starting to rise green and gold again. She didn't believe it, not yet, but she listened, and that was something. One evening, as she stirred a thin stew over the flame, her eldest daughter sat beside her and said, "The sky's less grey today." Anna looked up. It was true. Not blue, not bright, but softer. The clouds seemed thinner. "You're right," Anna said. And they sat there, for a long while, not saying much, just two figures wrapped in old cloth and small hope, beneath a sky that might just be beginning to remember how to be kind again. With every passing day, Anna's needle found more to do. The cold was easing, and though the air still held a strange, dry chill, people began to emerge from their hiding places, like roots testing the thaw. Cloaks needed patching. Boots were worn thin. Children had grown, their sleeves too short, their hems creeping above the knee. She sewed from morning to dusk, pausing only to eat or tend to the children. The red thread was long gone now, but she'd traded for other colors, green, gold, even a soft blue that reminded her of the sea before it had turned slate gray. Every stitch felt like defiance, not loud, not dramatic, quiet rebellion in the face of despair. Each repair was an act of belief, that the cloth would last another season, that the child would grow taller still, that the owner would live to wear it again. And people noticed. They didn't just come for mending anymore, they came to sit, to talk, to ask about the girl who played in the dust, about the lullaby Anna hummed under her breath, about Marcos never by name, but in glances and careful words. They brought her food without asking, left kindling by the doorway in a city that had once towered with golden domes and shouted with imperial pride. It was these small kindnesses that now held it upright. Anna taught her eldest daughter to sew. She handed her a needle one afternoon and said, "We make what's broken whole again." And the girl, solemn and gentle, nodded as if it had always been so. One evening, an elderly woman with crooked fingers and a voice like dry leaves brought her a folded bundle. "This was my son's," she said softly. Before, it was a tunic, torn and moth-eaten. Anna didn't ask questions. She just ran her fingers over the seams and began to mend. As the needle moved in and out, the world outside the window continued quietly. Horses clopped, water splashed, children chased a ball of rags, and someone hummed a tune she almost remembered. The empire, she thought, was not built only by soldiers or emperors. It was stitched together, thread by thread, by hands like hers. It happened on an ordinary morning. No trumpets, no voices raised, just a quiet gasp from a boy in the street, then another, and soon, Anna heard it too. Murmurs drifting through the broken alleyways like birdsong returning to a long silent forest. She stepped outside with the children and looked up, and there it was, the sun. Not a pale disk hidden behind ash, not a watery gleam struggling through clouds, but the real sun, golden, blinding, full. It poured across the rooftops in wide bands of light, catching on tiles, dancing across glass, striking the dome of the Hagia Sophia so fiercely that Anna had to squint. Shadows sharpened, color deepened. The city, long dulled by gray, seemed to inhale all at once. People didn't cheer, they just stood still. Some wept quietly, some dropped to their knees. A man removed his cap, a woman crossed herself slowly. A little girl spun in circles, her arms outstretched, laughing until she lost her breath. Anna held her youngest close. The girl tilted her head back and whispered, "It's warm." She was right. The sunlight on Anna's face felt like something forgotten. Not just heat, but memory. She could feel her skin drinking it in. Her body didn't tense against cold for the first time in months. That afternoon, the city came alive. Windows opened, doors creaked on rusted hinges. Cloth was hung out to air. Children ran barefoot through courtyards. Musicians played, not for coins, but for the joy of hearing their notes ride the wind again. Anna hung her threadbare shawl on the line, watched it flutter. She sat outside with her sewing, not because she had to, but because she wanted to be in the light. She held a piece of blue fabric in her hands, bright blue, sky blue. She didn't know where it had come from. Someone had given it to her days ago, perhaps, but now, it seemed meant for something more. So she began to sew, not a patch, not a repair, but something new, a beginning.